Hello, ladies and gentlemen. There's been news from very reliable Dreamweavers that in 4.0 we will be having a free limited 5-star selector. They said that Sparkle will be a definite addition to it, while the rest is kind of a mystery and may be subject to change. And I thought about a value tier list for a limited 5-star selector, but since there's only one confirmed character while the rest is a guess, why not just rank every limited character before 3.0 then, as if they were in the limited selector? That sounds fun, right? So let's do it. First of all, let's define some guidelines here as we make this a tier list format. First of all, the main power level of these characters will be considered that they have their full best in slot team with at least 2 cost on each party member unless said otherwise. So for example, Tribi is best in slot for Jing Liu. Obviously, Tribi's Sig is a worse damage increase, so she's E1S0. Meanwhile, Hyacinth in the same team wants her Sig more than her E1, so she's E0S1. I'll be mentioning the best teams that have them in their intended role, so I will be minimizing wheelchair comps as much as possible. The unfortunate reality is that support E1s are normalized for very old characters, otherwise if I took those away this list would be a lot more brutal. Second, this is counting the 4.0 updates, so Nova Flares for Black Swan and Sparkle are going to exist, as well as Yao Guang and Sparksy. And of course, the DPSs and supports that these characters will work with are going to be ranked possibly higher just because they exist in the game now. Third, this is considering endgame environments that don't just outright counter them. Boot gets hard countered by, let's say, a weakness lock, but is still going to be ranked high, for example. Lastly, the list is considering that if you like this character with enough dedication in farming their relics and learning how to play at an average level, this is what you should expect their impact will be and what they can cover for you. As always, if you don't bother learning characters that have a more complex playstyle, you won't see much play with them, or just if you have bad relics then you're kind of bricked. This is more in the range of around 30 substats and not sweating too much over 0 cycles, just clearing. So let's talk about the tiers now. The lowest tier are free or accessible 5 stars. Automatically we can dump Zilla, Luocha, and everyone else there. If you see these characters in a selector, you can just ignore them. There's no value in it when you can get them at any time or by accident. Next is a tier just having sustains on it. Evaluating sustain value in selectors is very difficult. It's very niche. Some accounts will rightfully think it's a brick because they run sustainless most of the time anyway. At the same time, some people think it's the most valuable thing in the world because they die without 3 limited sustains in anom. Generally, I would recommend picking up a limited sustain in a selector only if you are having survivability issues in anom. Because 4-star sustains should be enough in MOC, Apocalyptic Shadow, and PF, the 3 game modes, that you don't really need them. Oh, by the way, I should say that this isn't ranked from like left to right or anything, as in left is better than right. It's just a chronological order, I'm sorry. The next tier actually has some substance. These are characters that you can clear endgames with at E0, but their eidolons are very low value. As long as you build their team correctly in investment, you can rely on them to clear MOC, Apocalyptic Shadow, and Pure Fiction, but their eidolon themselves are not valuable. So if these characters are in a selector, you should only pick them out of favoritism, but if you already have them, their eidolons are hard to recommend even if you do like them, since they just don't do much compared to their support eidolons. Jingyuan's eidolons are a sad case of old design, and Argenti in his role as a Hertabot doesn't really care much for his own eidolons, so unfortunately there isn't much value there in terms of copies. The next tier are characters that can clear all main endgame modes, but do have a decent eidolon value to make them perform better. If these characters are on a selector, you'll only get them out of favoritism at E0, and eidolons do make them better if you really like them, but you can only really trust them to consistently clear the 3 endgame modes that don't outright counter them. Lune's E2 is a pretty big jump, but it's still very doubtful that he can clear night stages without dipping more into his support investment. Even with updated Sparkle, it seems rather rare that he can cross the threshold without bashing your head in with substats. Dr. Ratio does have actually really good eidolons across the board. At E0 he is really bad, and he certainly has the best power jumps from a 1.x character, but at the end of the day, he's still a 1.x character, so this is what you can reasonably get away with him. As for Zhao Cho, he is a universal character and has many teams, but the problem is that outside of the 3 main game modes, nearly all of those teams don't work with just him at E0. E2 gives him a bit of a chance of being usable with DOT, but Black Swan completely shattered that, and Acheron needs so much help now that Zhao Cho's Eidolons just cannot compete with modern Nihilities. Unfortunately, the most that you can expect out of Zhao Cho is to be a PF Acheron support, and even that is getting a little more sus to run. So, moving on to the next tier, you have characters that can do well in all endgame modes at E0, but can sometimes clear Knight and King stages that advantage them. If these characters are in the Selector, they mostly will be pulled for favoritism, but even if you don't like them, you can still have some use if you want a bit of a challenge. Getting their Eidolons is nice, but it's highly unlikely it will change their current situation of clearing anom, unless it's just really high like an E6. Yunli is a lot more situational than these units, and remember that LCs are not considered for her, which is a big deal. There are more things that could counter Yunli, but there are also situations she can turn into a beast and actually do a Knight stage if they just move enough times. And of course with proper support investment. I think she deserves to be here. Next is Jade, again a situational unit just like Yunli. She has very favorable cost spreads with Tribi, Hyacine, and Herta, and if you consider that Tribi or Herta have at least one Eidolon, there will be cases that you can expect Jade to clear a Knight stage, and pretty much every endgame mode that doesn't counter her, she can find usage of. Rappa is much of the same. Her damage is mostly based on how many breaks they are, and if the enemies are slow, she doesn't really do much, but in favorable matchups where break is abundant and doesn't get delayed too hard, then she can clear a Knight or even a King stage for you. Provided the matchup is just right, at E0 with good support investment spreads, she should just squash all of the 3 main endgame modes, you know, MOC, AS, and Pure Fiction. Past this point, these are characters that I can somewhat recommend. These are the characters that you can actually expect them to clear anom arbitration with enough investment, so buckle up. The next tier are characters that can consistently clear all endgame modes with Eidolons on them. Unless the matchup just absolutely destroys their usability, these are characters that, with enough Eidolons, are able to clear anom arbitration, and even if they are countered by the lesser endgame modes, may still clear them. If these characters are on a Selector, getting them at E0 can guarantee performance against non-countered content in MOC, AS, and Pure Fiction. And with Eidolons, even if they get countered by AS, MOC, and Pure Fiction, they can still clear most likely, and they can probably clear King and Knight stages that don't counter them. With proper investment spreads, these characters can be very valuable. The first is Jingliu. Her E1 is the big early Eidolon, and her value stays the same until E6. If you have E1 Jingliu and the appropriate investment for wheelchair, she should be clearing anom Knights and Kings that don't counter her gimmick or element. And she should clear the other endgames even if she is countered. Next is Fei Xiao, the min-max queen herself. Fei Xiao's E2 specifically is really good. Even in Pure Fiction, she could still be usable at E2, which is funny. The only reason why I can't put Fei Xiao any higher is that her gameplay is actually so technical that without E2 and Amazing Relics, I doubt most people will be satisfied with her performance. With enough technical play, you can put her a tier higher, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect yourself doing that. Boothill is much of the same. His technical gameplay can make you grab some of his Eidolons even if they're not the best, just to make him feel comfortable. Of course, it's not as efficient as pulling for Dahlia investment, but again, with the set of rules, this is his best case scenario. If you have an extra Eidolon on him or Dahlia, you can pretty safely assume he clears anom stages, and maybe even PF if you really want to. The last is Robin. Robin has a great gimmick, but without certain matchups at E0, she becomes a really big liability. Just too little energy generation without her Sig or E2, and her buffs without E1 doesn't make up for her many weaknesses. That being said, with E1 and better with E2, she should be a trustworthy support for Knight and King stages, and the other endgame modes she could clear even if she's hard countered. Next is the second to the last tier. These are characters that can clear anom Knight and King stages pretty safely at E0. Their Eidolon returns vary, but nevertheless they don't need Eidolons unless the fight counters them. These DPS characters on a selector are kinda weird, because for DPS, they'll only see value if the stars align in their support investment, which usually means you were already investing in supports around the damage dealers and you were gonna get them anyway. But if you have no pieces, the value of DPS in this tier absolutely tanks. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be going through all of them just so you don't get confused. First is Acheron. Surprising, right? Acheron's Eidolons are actually not very good, and her E2 has receded in value with more nihilities like Nova Flare, Silverwolf, and Swan. However, Nova Flare, Silverwolf, and Swan at E1S0 are actually broken enough to carry her. It's her own personal wheelchair that the other characters can't really take full advantage of. She's not that much different from Firefly or Jingliu of being able to clear Anom Kings and Knights, just because her supports at 2 cost are ridiculously strong. She is also easy to play so she doesn't get taxed like Fei Xiao. So for Acheron, she's good enough at E0, her supports are all E1S0, and she can clear pretty much every endgame mode. Despite all of Acheron's weakness, she does qualify for this tier. But like I said, you have to follow her best in slot investment to the T, otherwise she doesn't clear much at all. Next is Firefly. Like I said with Acheron, but she's actually better now. There are more cases where break is countered, but Dahlia has softened that blow to be not as much of an issue for now. Unlike Acheron, Firefly's Eidolons are good, and she can brute force pretty easily pretty much every endgame mode. She ticks all the boxes. If you have Dahlia, Fugue, and HMC already, getting Firefly for free is incredibly valuable, despite her being a DPS, and getting more copies of her is a pretty decent amount of value too. Last is Sunday. He may not be the best hyper carry support and his credits have shortened quite a lot, but nevertheless Sunday can clear Anom consistently at E0. His Sig does make up quite a large part of his power level, but even so he's proven to work without it. With that said, unlike some of the supports in the last tier, he can't be lazy. For Sunday to consistently clear Anom, at this point, his choices in DPS need Eidolons now. His best choices in a team comp is an E1 Aglaya and an E1 Cyrene, or some variation with Phynon, but that's breaking the rules since Phynon should be E2. Provided you have his top choices well invested, Sunday can be a very valuable character. And again, this is only within the scope of Anom. If you really only care about MOC, AS, and Pure Fiction, he's still going to be a top pick. And finally, we have the cream of the crop, the last tier. These are characters that can be the reason you can full star a king stage at minimal investment. These are the most valuable characters in a selector, and is pretty much a game of which archetype you favor more in your account. Note that you can probably clear king stage with these characters at E0 with enough technique, but I would rather list them as needing IDOs just so I can guarantee their performance. First is Kafka. DOT dies without Kafka. Her E1 is decent but not really that game changing, and the rest are the same thing. Her E0 performance is just way too good, and for any DOT team is a must have if you want to clear King Stage. And because DOT is actually pretty good at the moment, even considering the rule of every other teammate being only 2 costs, DOT will still probably be able to full star even without Kafka's E1. Next is Silverwolf. Without Silverwolf, Acheron dies in Anom. It's a good thing her LZ is garbage because you can allocate your resources to her Eidolons, in which case you have a good chance of full starring King, either with Archer or even Acheron with E2. She's the OG brute force unit and has AoE now, so outside of Anom there will be almost no counter to Silverwolf with Eidolons, making her a top pick if she ever is on a selector. At E0 she's not as important as the characters in the same team though, but with Eidolons, sure. This is Nova Flare Sparkle. She took Sunday's job in most of his teams because good lord her buffs are ridiculous. She is strong enough to use low cost Archer and Sparksy to do full star Kings even with the 2 cost rule. Pick this character up from the selector instantly if you have the free Archer and just watch the magic happen. Next is Black Swan. This is Nova Flare Swan, who is one of Acheron's crutches and has great Eidolons. It's surprising how strong Black Swan really is even outside of DOT because her general amp and okay personal damage makes her actually usable. And DOT rarely gets countered nowadays. But of course, like every other DPS, she isn't a lazy pick. You do need to pull around Swan with High Sealants and Kafka, but after you've set the groundwork, she is all smooth sailing. Swan pretty much ticks all the boxes. She can clear Anom comfortably at E0. Her other teammates at E1 S0 can get her to 2-star, and with more Eidolons in Swan due to Nova Flare, she can even full star the King stage. And if she does end up being on a selector, she's very valuable. Lastly is Fugue. This is a very odd choice, some people might think. The reason why is because not only does Fugue hit every category with Break, Harmony MC is not always going to be there for Break, especially with how Elation MC might turn out and how many Elation Shield enemies there are. Because of that, Fugue won't have many alternatives in the future. Compared to the others, she needs her Eidolons way more, but she does hit the criteria nonetheless. And yeah, that's pretty much it. To give a general guideline, if any one of these characters from the top tier are chosen, pick them based on which archetype you favor. You select Kafka or Swan for DOT, Silverwolf for Acheron or Archer, Fugue for Break, or Sparkle for the general crit hyper carry archetype. For the lesser tiers, it's a matter of favoritism. The only difference is how much you get punished less for picking them, to be honest. With all of that said, how does this Selector actually change the meta? Quite a lot. My main concern is that if Sparkle is really in a free selector, that means they're giving us a broken character for free. And that's usually not a good sign, because the meta will be balanced around Sparkle. In which case, you will focus on just the top tier, and again, everything else is just who gets punished less if you get them. It will hold us over for a while, it is what it is. If you don't care about anom, you can always pick whatever you want. I'm just giving you a guide of what you can expect with these units, with a reasonable amount of effort, and I don't want to give you false hope or anything. Anyway, hope this was helpful. When they do release who the free 5 stars are, you already have an idea of what I think about them now, since I just included everyone in it. But yeah, that's it for the video. Like, share, do the algorithm stuff, and I'll see you later. Bye bye!